Jake Sullivan had been a ship captain for 12 years when everything changed. His vessel HMS Endeavour was exploring the outer regions of the Kepler 442 system when they first detected the strange energy signatures. The crew of 24 had been conducting routine surveys of the rocky moons orbiting the distant star when their sensors picked up something that should not have been there. The readings showed multiple large objects moving in coordinated patterns near the fourth moon. Jake ordered his science officer Amy Rodriguez to run a full scan while he studied the data on his command screen. The objects were roughly the size of small frigates, but their design was unlike anything in the human databases. The hulls seemed to shift and change as they moved through space like living things, rather than metal ships. Amy turned from her station with worry in her eyes. She had been Jake's second in command for 3 years, and he trusted her judgment completely. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tension underneath when she spoke. The ships were not responding to any communication attempts, and their energy signatures were unlike anything she had ever seen before. The readings suggested some kind of advanced cloaking technology that was far beyond current human capabilities. Jake made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of turning around and reporting back to Earth, he ordered the Endeavour to move closer for a better look. His scientific curiosity had always been his greatest strength as an explorer, but now it became his greatest weakness. The crew trusted him completely, and none of them questioned the order. Even though several looked nervous about approaching the unknown vessels, the attack came without warning. One moment, the Endeavour was conducting passive scans from what Jake thought was a safe distance, and the next moment their shields were failing under some kind of energy weapon that tore through their defenses like paper. The bridge erupted in sparks and smoke as systems overloaded, and Amy was thrown from her station by a massive impact that shook the entire ship. Jake tried to raise the other ships on all frequencies but received no response, except for a single transmission that made his blood run cold. The voice was deep and alien, with a strange clicking sound between the words. It spoke in perfect English, but with an accent that was unlike anything Jake had ever heard before. The message was simple and terrifying at the same time. The alien voice announced that the humans had entered a hunting preserve and were now designated as prey. They would be given a sporting chance to survive, but the outcome was already predetermined. The creatures called themselves Zephyrians, and they had been hunting across the galaxy for thousands of years. Humans were just the latest species to provide them with entertainment. The transmission ended with coordinates for the moon below and instructions for the crew to abandon ship within 1 hour. Any who remained aboard would be destroyed along with their vessel. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew and saw the same mixture of fear and disbelief that he felt himself. This was not first contact as humanity had always imagined it would be. Amy managed to get back to her feet and began coordinating the evacuation procedures while Jake tried to send a distress signal back to Earth. The Zephyrian ships were jamming most of their communications, but he managed to get a brief message through before their systems were completely disabled. He could only hope that someone would receive it and understand what had happened to them. The crew gathered in the shuttle bay with whatever supplies they could carry. Jake looked at each face, knowing that he was responsible for bringing them to this place. There was Lieutenant Commander Amy Rodriguez, who had served with him for years. Chief Engineer Danny Martinez, who could fix anything that broke. Security Chief Marcus Chun, who had kept them all safe during previous missions. Medical Officer Lisa Brooks, who had saved countless lives throughout their travels together. The shuttle trip to the moon's surface was silent, except for the hum of the engines. Jake could see the Zephyrian vessels in the distance following them. Down but keeping their distance? The aliens seemed to be enjoying the anticipation of the hunt that was about to begin. The moon itself was a barren world of rock and ice with deep canyons and cave systems that would provide both shelter and countless places for predators to hide. They landed in a flat area near what appeared to be some kind of ancient ruins. The atmosphere was thin but breathable, and the gravity was slightly less than Earth normal. Jake ordered his people to gather what supplies they could from the shuttle before it was destroyed by the aliens as promised. They had enough food and water for perhaps 2 weeks if they were careful, but he suspected the hunt would not last nearly that long. The Zephyrians appeared, without warning, just as the sun was setting on the alien world. Jake got his first look at their predators and felt his courage drain away completely. They were nearly 9 feet tall, with sleek bodies covered in what looked like natural armor. Their faces were elongated with multiple eyes and mouths full of razor-sharp teeth. Most terrifying of all were the claws that extended from their hands like curved knives. Designed for tearing flesh, the creatures moved with fluid grace that spoke of perfect physical conditioning and countless years of hunting experience. Strange markings on their skin glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse with their heartbeat. Jake realized that these were not just alien soldiers but specialized predators who had evolved specifically for the hunt. The leader of the group was larger than the others, with more elaborate markings covering his body. He spoke in that same clicking voice that Jake had heard on the ship, announcing that he was Hunt Master Krex and that the humans were now part of a sacred ritual that had been practiced by his people for millennia. They would be given basic survival equipment and a 12-hour head start before the hunt began in earnest. Krex explained the rules with obvious enjoyment. The humans could use whatever they found on the moon to survive, but they could not leave the planet. The hunt would continue until only one remained or until all had been killed. The Zephyrians would use their traditional weapons and hunting methods to make the experience more sporting for both predator and prey. Jake felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him as he looked at his crew. These people had followed him into this nightmare, and now they were all going to die because of his curiosity. Amy stood beside him trying to project confidence, but he could see the fear in her eyes. The others were looking to him for leadership, but he had no idea how to fight creatures that were clearly designed to be perfect killers. The hunt began at dawn the next day, and Jake knew that their time was running out. The hunt lasted 23 days, and Jake Sullivan watched his crew die one by one. The Zephyrians were patient killers who enjoyed the terror as much as the actual killing. They would stalk their prey for hours before striking, and always made sure the others could hear the screams. Amy Rodriguez was the first to fall when she tried to create a distraction so the others could escape from a cave system where they had been trapped. Jake found her body 3 days later with the strange, glowing marks that the Zephyrians carved into their victims. The sight of his closest friend lying broken and mutilated broke something inside him that would never fully heal. Danny Martinez died trying to repair a broken communication device that might have called for help. Marcus Chun lasted 2 weeks before Huntmaster Krex himself tracked him down and killed him with those terrible claws. Lisa Brooks was the last to die besides Jake himself. She had been wounded in an earlier attack and could barely walk, but she still tried to help Jake set traps for their hunters. The infection from her wounds was spreading, and they both knew she would not last much longer even if the aliens never found them. She made Jake promise to survive long enough to tell Earth what had happened to them before she died in his arms. Jake was alone for the final week of the hunt, and he learned things about himself that he wished he never had to know. He discovered that he could kill when he had to, and that he could ignore the screams of dying friends when survival depended on it. Most importantly, he learned that the Zephyrians had weaknesses despite their obvious advantages. They were overconfident, and they followed predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone desperate enough to try. The rescue fleet from Earth arrived on the 23rd day, just as Krex was closing in for the final kill. Jake had been hiding in a deep cave system with no food or water left, and only hours before the Huntmaster would have found him. The sight of human ships dropping out of hyperspace was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, but it came too late to save anyone except himself. Huntmaster Krex appeared before him one final time before the rescue ships could reach the surface. The alien seemed almost disappointed that the hunt was ending prematurely, but he had one last gift for his surviving prey. Krex pressed his clawed hand against Jake's left shoulder and left a mark that glowed with the same blue light as the Zephyrian's own markings. The pain was incredible, but Jake forced himself not to scream. Krex explained that the mark was a traditional claiming symbol that meant Jake was unfinished prey. The Huntmaster would return in 3 years when Jake had grown stronger and more skilled. The alien seemed to think this was a great honor that he was bestowing on the human survivor. Krex promised that their next meeting would be even more entertaining than this one had been. Jake returned to Earth as the sole survivor of the Endeavour disaster and found that he could not adjust to normal life. The nightmares came every night, filled with the screams of his dead crew and the clicking laughter of the Zephyrians. The mark on his shoulder glowed softly in the darkness and served as a constant reminder of what was coming. He knew that Krex would keep his promise and return to finish what he had started. The official reports classified the incident, and Jake was forbidden from speaking about it publicly. The government wanted to avoid panic while they tried to understand the threat that the Zephyrians represented. Jake was given a medal and a promotion, but he resigned from the Terran Defense Force within a month. He could not stand being around other people who had no idea what real monsters looked like. Jake disappeared from official records and made his way to the fighting pits of Mars Colony, where violence was a way of life. He needed to learn how to fight properly because he knew that running and hiding would not save him when Krex returned. The underground fights were brutal and illegal, but they taught him things that no military academy ever could. He learned how to read an opponent's movements and how to strike without hesitation. The first year was the hardest because Jake had to overcome his natural human instincts that told him to avoid danger. He forced himself to embrace pain and violence as tools that would keep him alive. He studied every recording of the Zephyrian encounter that he could find, and analyzed their fighting techniques until he could predict their movements. The aliens were skilled, but they followed patterns that could be learned and countered. Dr. Elena Vasquez found him in the second year after the incident. She was a xenobiologist who had been studying the Zephyrian remains that were recovered from the moon where his crew had died. Elena had information about alien anatomy and behavior that was not available in any official database. More importantly, she understood what Jake was trying to do and why he needed to do it. Elena became his research partner and helped him understand the science behind what he was planning. The Zephyrians had specific biological limitations that could be exploited if someone was willing to modify themselves enough to take advantage of them. She introduced him to underground doctors who specialized in cybernetic enhancements and illegal body modifications that could make a human faster and stronger. The transformation was painful and dangerous, but Jake endured it because he had no choice. He had subdermal armor plates installed under his skin that would protect him from Zephyrian claws. Neural implants improved his reaction time and allowed him to process information faster than any normal human. Optical enhancements gave him the ability to see in different spectrums of light, including the frequencies that Zephyrian cloaking technology used. Jake also began recruiting others who had lost everything to alien attacks. Marcus Chen's brother, David, had survived a Zephyrian raid on a mining colony and wanted revenge. Lisa Brooks had a sister named Carol who was a combat engineer with experience in zero-gravity fighting. Danny Martinez had a cousin named Tony who was a skilled pilot with knowledge of alien ship designs. The team spent months training together and learning to fight as a coordinated unit. Jake taught them everything he had learned about Zephyrian tactics and psychology. They studied the alien honor code and learned how to use it against them. Most importantly, they learned to think like predators instead of prey because that was the only way they could hope to survive. By the end of the second year, Jake had transformed himself into something that was no longer entirely human. The cybernetic enhancements had changed his body while the constant training had changed his mind. He no longer felt fear the way he once had, and he could make life or death decisions without hesitation. The scared ship captain who had led his crew to their deaths was gone forever. Jake established a hidden base on the asteroid series, where they could prepare for Krex's return. The facility was equipped with weapons and equipment specifically designed to counter Zephyrian advantages. Everything was ready, and all they had to do was wait for Huntmaster Krex to keep his promise in return for the final hunt that would determine who was truly the apex predator. Huntmaster Krex arrived at the Europa research station exactly 3 years after he had marked Jake Sullivan. The alien had kept his promise and brought 12 of his finest hunters with him to finish what they had started. Krex expected to find the same frightened human who had barely survived their first encounter, but instead he found something that confused and intrigued him. The research station appeared to be conducting routine xenoarchaeological work on the ice moon's surface. Jake had been living there for 6 months under the cover of studying ancient alien artifacts that had been discovered in the deep ice. The facility looked normal from the outside, with standard human equipment and regular supply shipments arriving. From Earth, Krex's sensors detected only basic defensive systems and a small crew of scientists who seemed unaware of the approaching danger. Jake felt the familiar blue glow of his shoulder mark, intensifying as the Zephyrian ships entered the system. The cybernetic enhancements in his body allowed him to sense the alien presence long before their cloaking technology would have hidden them from normal human detection. He activated the hidden communication system that connected him to his team. Members who were positioned throughout the station and the surrounding ice caves. David Jun confirmed that all defensive systems were ready, and that the traps they had spent months preparing were armed and waiting. Carol Brooks reported that the explosive charges placed throughout the ice tunnels were synchronized and ready to seal off escape routes when the fighting began. Tony Martinez was standing by in the hidden launch bay with their specially modified ship ready to pursue any Zephyrians who tried to flee. Dr. Elena Vasquez was monitoring the alien communications from her position in the underground laboratory. She had learned to understand the Zephyrian language during their years of preparation and was translating their tactical discussions in real time. The aliens were planning a standard hunting approach, with half their force creating a perimeter, while the others moved in to flush out the prey. They had no idea that they were walking into a carefully prepared killing ground. Jake watched through his enhanced vision as the first Zephyrian hunters materialized from their cloaked positions near the station's main entrance. They moved with the same fluid grace that he remembered from their first encounter, but now he could see the subtle tells that revealed their intentions. The way they positioned their feet before striking and the angle of their claws when they prepared to attack were no longer mysteries to him. The aliens entered the station expecting to find helpless scientists, but instead triggered the first series of traps that Jake had prepared. Hidden weapons emerged from the walls and ceiling to target the intruders with ammunition specifically designed to penetrate Zephyrian armor. The bullets were made from a rare metal that Elena had discovered could disrupt the aliens' natural healing abilities and cause severe damage to their enhanced physiology. 3 Zephyrian hunters fell in the first 30 seconds of the attack, but the others adapted quickly to the new threat. They began using their cloaking technology more aggressively and tried to avoid the obvious trap locations. Jake had anticipated this response and activated the secondary defense systems that filled the air with a fine mist that revealed the positions of cloaked enemies. The battle moved through the station's corridors as Jake and his team engaged the surviving Zephyrians in close combat. The aliens quickly realized that they were not facing the same type of prey they had hunted before. Jake moved with inhuman speed and precision thanks to his cybernetic enhancements. His reflexes were fast enough to dodge Zephyrian strikes, and his enhanced strength allowed him to match their physical capabilities. David Hyun used his knowledge of Zephyrian tactics to predict their movements and set up ambush in the station's service tunnels. His hatred for the aliens gave him the motivation to fight with a brutality that matched their own. Carol Brooks turned the station's own systems against the invaders by using her engineering skills to create electrical traps and environmental hazards that caught the aliens off guard. Jake found himself face to face with a Zephyrian hunter in the station's main laboratory. The alien was larger than most of its kind and bore the ritual scars that indicated it was an experienced killer. Jake could see the confusion in the creature's multiple eyes as it tried to understand how a human could move so quickly and strike so accurately. The cybernetic enhancements had made Jake into something that was no longer entirely human, and the alien could sense the change. The fight was brutal and lasted several minutes as both combatants tested each other's abilities. Jake used his knowledge of Zephyrian anatomy to target the weak points that Elena had identified in her research. The alien's natural armor was thick, but there were gaps at the joints that could be exploited by someone who knew where to look. Jake's enhanced vision allowed him to see these vulnerabilities even in the dim lighting of the laboratory. Jake finally killed the Zephyrian by driving a specially designed blade through a gap in its neck armor. The weapon had been created specifically to penetrate alien physiology and deliver a toxin that would shut down their enhanced healing abilities. The creature fell to the floor with a look of surprise and respect in its dying eyes, as if it finally understood that it had been hunting something that could fight back. The battle continued for hours as Jake's team systematically eliminated the Zephyrian hunting party. The aliens had superior technology and physical capabilities, but they were unprepared for prey that could think and plan and adapt faster than they could. Each trap that Jake had set was designed to exploit specific weaknesses in Zephyrian behavior and psychology. Huntmaster Krex realized that something had gone terribly wrong when half his hunting party failed to report back. The alien had been monitoring the battle from his ship in orbit and could see that his carefully planned hunt was turning into a disaster. The humans were not running and hiding as they should have been, but instead were actively hunting as hunters with deadly efficiency. Krex decided to take personal command of the situation and transported down to the station with his remaining hunters. He found Jake waiting for him in the central chamber surrounded by the bodies of dead Zephyrians. The human looked different than Krex remembered, with new scars and modifications that spoke of serious preparation and training. Jake spoke to Krex in perfect Zephyrian language that he had learned during his years of preparation. He thanked the Huntmaster for keeping his promise and returning, but explained that the rules of the hunt had changed. This time the humans would be the predators and the aliens would be the prey. Jake's shoulder mark was glowing brighter than ever before, but now it seemed to pulse with confident anticipation rather than fear. Krex felt something that he had never experienced before in thousands of years of hunting across the galaxy. The emotion was unfamiliar and uncomfortable, and it took him several moments to realize that what he was feeling was uncertainty. The prey had evolved into something that he did not understand, and the hunt was no longer proceeding according to the ancient patterns that had always guaranteed success. The Huntmaster looked at Jake Sullivan and saw a predator looking back at him. Huntmaster Krex fled from the Europa station with only 3 of his 12 hunters still alive. The alien had never retreated from prey before in his entire life, but Jake Sullivan was no longer the helpless human he had marked 3 years ago. The creature that had killed 8 experienced Zephyrian hunters was something new and dangerous that Krex did not understand. The Huntmaster's pride was wounded, but his survival instincts were stronger than his ego. Jake did not let Krex escape without consequences. He and his team pursued the fleeing aliens through the Jupiter system using their specially modified ship that Tony Martinez had prepared for this exact situation. The vessel was equipped with sensors that could track Zephyrian cloaking technology and weapons that could penetrate their advanced armor. Most importantly, it was fast enough to keep up with alien ships that had previously been impossible for humans to catch. The chase led them to an abandoned mining station on Io where Krex hoped to regroup and plan his next move. The Huntmaster was broadcasting distress calls to other Zephyrian hunting packs, but Jake had learned to jam their communications during his years of preparation. Krex was alone with his remaining hunters and cut off from the support network that had always guaranteed his success in previous hunts. Jake's team surrounded the mining station and began their own hunt. David Chun used his military training to coordinate the assault, while Carol Brooks disabled the station's life support systems to force the aliens out of hiding. Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored Zephyrian communications and provided tactical advice about their likely responses to different attacks. Tony Martinez kept their ship ready for quick extraction if the situation became too dangerous. The psychological warfare was as important as the physical combat. Jake broadcast messages to Krex in perfect Zephyrian language explaining how the Huntmaster had failed his sacred duty by allowing prey to become predators. He described in detail how each of the dead hunters had been killed and challenged Krex's competence as a leader. The messages were designed to make the alien angry and careless, which would make him easier to defeat. Krex responded with fury and desperation, as he realized that his reputation among his own people was being destroyed. The Huntmaster had built his status over centuries of successful hunts, but now he was being humiliated by the very prey he had marked as his own. The alien's pride would not allow him to accept defeat, but his remaining hunters were losing confidence in his leadership. Jake found evidence of Krex's previous hunts when he searched the alien's personal quarters on the mining station. The Huntmaster kept trophies from every species he had killed over the centuries, and Jake discovered personal items that had belonged to Amy Rodriguez and the other crew members, who had died on that moon 3 years ago. The sight of his dead friend's identification badge covered in alien markings filled Jake with a cold rage that burned brighter than any emotion he had ever felt. The discovery of the trophies changed something fundamental in Jake's approach to the hunt. What had started as a defensive action to protect himself from Krex's return became a mission of vengeance for all the innocent people the aliens had killed. Jake broadcast images of the trophy collection to Earth and to other human colonies, showing the galaxy exactly what the Zephyrians really were beneath their claims of honorable hunting. Krex made his final mistake when he tried to use the mining station's industrial equipment to create traps for the humans. The Huntmaster was skilled in natural hunting techniques, but he had never needed to understand human technology. Jake and his team had spent months studying the layout of facilities like this one, and they knew how to turn the aliens' own traps against him. The battle in the mining station's processing plant was swift and brutal. Jake's cybernetic enhancements allowed him to move through the industrial machinery with inhuman grace, while his enhanced vision let him track the cloaked Zephyrians even in the complex shadows created by the equipment. The remaining alien hunters fell one by one as Jake demonstrated that he had learned their techniques and improved upon them. Jake cornered the last of Krex's hunters in the station's main control room and offered the creature a choice. The alien could provide information about other Zephyrian hunting packs and their locations in exchange for a quick death, or Jake could take his time and extract the information through less pleasant methods. The hunter chose to cooperate and gave Jake access codes to Zephyrian communication networks and the locations of their hidden bases. Huntmaster Krex found himself alone for the first time in centuries as Jake systematically eliminated his support network. The alien had always relied on his reputation and the fear he inspired in his prey, but now he was the one being hunted by something that felt no fear at all. Krex's own hunters were dead, and his ship was damaged beyond repair, leaving him stranded on the mining station with nowhere to run. Jake took his time approaching Krex's final hiding place, because he wanted the alien to experience the same helpless terror that his crew had felt on that moon. He used the station's communication system to broadcast a countdown that let Krex know exactly when death would arrive. The psychological torture was deliberate and calculated to break the Huntmaster's spirit before Jake broke his body. The confrontation, when it finally came, was anticlimactic. Krex tried to fight with the same techniques that had made him a legendary hunter, but Jake had studied those techniques for 3 years and had developed counters for every possible attack. The alien's claws could not penetrate Jake's subdermal armor, and his natural speed was no match for cybernetically enhanced reflexes. Jake did not kill Krex immediately, but instead inflicted the same type of wounds that the alien had given to Amy Rodriguez and the other crew members. He wanted the Huntmaster to understand exactly what his victims had experienced during their final moments. The alien's regenerative abilities kept him alive long enough to feel every cut and every broken bone that Jake chose to inflict. Krex finally died begging for mercy in his own language, while Jake stood over him speaking the names of every human the alien had killed. The Huntmaster's final words were a warning that other Zephyrian hunting packs would come to investigate his disappearance, but Jake was no longer concerned about future threats. He had proven that humans could evolve beyond their original limitations and become something that even the galaxy's apex predators could not defeat. Jake transmitted a message to the Zephyrian homeworld using Krex's own communication codes. The message was simple and direct, explaining that Huntmaster Krex was dead and that any other aliens who wanted to hunt humans would face the same fate. The age of humanity as prey was over, and the galaxy would need to learn new rules for survival. The hunt was complete, but Jake knew that this was only the beginning of a larger war between predator and prey species across the galaxy. The response from the Zephyrian homeworld came faster than Jake had expected. 3 weeks after Huntmaster Krex's death, a massive alien fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system, carrying the most elite hunters that their species had ever produced. The Zephyrian High Council had sent their best warriors to investigate what had happened to one of their most legendary huntmasters and to restore their species' reputation as the galaxy's apex predators. Jake was waiting for them at the abandoned Titan station in the outer solar system. He had spent those 3 weeks preparing the facility as the ultimate hunting ground, where he would face the strongest opponents that the Zephyrian species could send against him. The station's zero-gravity foundries and industrial complexes provided the perfect environment for the type of three-dimensional combat that would determine once and for all whether humans or aliens deserved to be called the galaxy's dominant predators. The alien fleet consisted of 50 ships carrying over 300 of the most skilled hunters in Zephyrian history. These were not the overconfident warriors who had underestimated human capabilities, but veteran killers who had studied Jake's tactics and prepared countermeasures for his enhanced abilities. The fleet was commanded by Supreme Huntmaster Vex, who had personally trained Krex centuries ago and wanted revenge for his former student's death. Jake was no longer the same person who had faced Krex at the mining station. The months of constant fighting had changed him in ways that went beyond his cybernetic enhancements. His humanity was still there, but it was buried beneath layers of predatory instinct and cold calculation that made him more alien than human. Dr. Elena Vasquez had warned him about the psychological costs of his transformation, but Jake had accepted them as the price of survival. The battle began when the first wave of Zephyrian hunters infiltrated Titan Station, expecting to find a desperate human making his final stand. Instead, they found a carefully prepared killing ground where every corridor and chamber had been designed to channel the aliens into predetermined death traps. Jake had spent months studying the station's layout and had turned the entire facility into a weapon that he could use against his enemies. The Zephyrians quickly realized that they were facing something unprecedented in their species' history. Jake moved through the station's industrial complexes with inhuman grace and speed, while his enhanced senses allowed him to track multiple opponents simultaneously. His cybernetic modifications had integrated so completely with his nervous system that he no longer thought of them as artificial enhancements but as natural extensions of his evolved capabilities. The zero-gravity environment that should have favored the aliens instead became Jake's greatest advantage. His cybernetic balance systems and enhanced spatial awareness allowed him to navigate the complex three-dimensional battlefield with precision that no unmodified human could match. The Zephyrians found themselves disoriented and vulnerable as Jake attacked from unexpected angles and disappeared into the station's maze of pipes and machinery. Jake's weapons had been specifically designed to exploit every weakness that Dr. Elena Vasquez had discovered in Zephyrian physiology. His ammunition was made from rare metals that disrupted the aliens' natural healing abilities, while his blade weapons were coated with toxins that targeted their enhanced nervous systems. Most importantly, his tactics were unpredictable because he combined human ingenuity with alien hunting techniques that he had learned and improved upon. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical combat. Jake broadcast the death screams of fallen hunters throughout the station to demoralize the survivors, while he taunted them in their own language about their failure to avenge their dead huntmaster. He had learned that Zephyrian society was built on reputation and honor, which made them vulnerable to attacks on their self-image and status. Supreme Huntmaster Vex realized that traditional hunting tactics would not work against Jake and ordered his remaining hunters to abandon their sacred protocols in favor of overwhelming force. The alien commander was willing to sacrifice his species' honor to achieve victory, but Jake had anticipated this response and had prepared for it during his months of planning. The final confrontation took place in the station's main foundry where Jake had established his command center. Vex arrived with his last 30 hunters expecting to corner their prey, but instead found themselves trapped in a chamber that Jake had filled with automated weapons and environmental hazards. The Supreme Huntmaster watched in horror as his elite warriors were systematically eliminated by defenses that anticipated their every move. Jake faced Vex in single combat among the floating bodies of dead Zephyrians and the wreckage of destroyed machinery. The Supreme Huntmaster was larger and more skilled than any opponent Jake had previously faced, but the human had evolved beyond the limitations that had once made his species vulnerable. The battle was fierce and lasted for hours as both combatants pushed their enhanced abilities to the absolute limit. Vex finally fell when Jake used the alien's own momentum against him and drove a poisoned blade through the Supreme Huntmaster's primary heart. The creature's dying words were a grudging acknowledgement that Jake had achieved something impossible by evolving beyond his original nature. The Zephyrian admitted that humans had proven themselves worthy of respect as fellow predators rather than mere prey. The battle ended with Jake standing alone in the foundry surrounded by the bodies of over 300 dead Zephyrians. His cybernetic enhancements had been pushed to their limits and several systems were failing, but he had survived the greatest test that any human had ever faced. The blue glow of his shoulder mark had changed from the mark of claimed prey to something entirely new that even he did not fully understand. The response from the Zephyrian High Council came in the form of a formal transmission that Jake received while he was still recovering from his wounds. The alien leadership acknowledged his victory and offered him something that had never been given to any non-Zephyrian in their species' history. They invited him to join their hunting academies as an instructor, who would teach their young hunters about the new realities of a galaxy where humans could no longer be considered easy prey. Jake's response was broadcast across the galaxy to every species that had ever been hunted by the Zephyrians. His message was simple but carried implications that would change the balance of power throughout known space. He announced that humanity was no longer interested in being prey and that any predator species that threatened human colonies would face the same fate as Huntmaster Krex and Supreme Huntmaster Vex. The transformation was complete and Jake Sullivan had become something that the galaxy had never seen before. He was no longer fully human, but he was not alien either. He had evolved into a bridge between species that represented the future of intelligent life in a universe where adaptation and survival were the only constants that mattered. The hunt would continue, but now humans would be the ones setting the rules and determining who deserved to be called the galaxy's apex predators.